Hello, everyone. Welcome to our third professional development webinar offered by the Research and Theory Division of AECT. I am Lucas Vasconcelos, Assistant Professor at University of South Carolina, and I will be moderating this webinar. I'm honored to introduce a great team of scholars who will talk to us about computational thinking in K-12 pre-service teacher education. First, we have Dr. Peter Rich, professor at Brigham Young University, and also Dr. Kale, professor at West Virginia University. As a reminder, each presenter has about 15 to 20 minutes, and we'll have some Q&A at the end. All right, the floor is yours.
Lucas, who do you want to go first?
Oh, I have to choose. Doesn't matter. Whoever wants to go.
All right, tell you what, I'll go ahead, and then Ugur, you can go after that. Does that work? Okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen. Okay, and I'm just gonna arrange things. I'm not as familiar with so I don't have all the chat and other things up. So if I go through this and there's something, you just stop me, just speak out loud so I can hear you all. So I'll go ahead and present here. See if this works. Great. So my name is Peter Rich, as Lucas had said. What I wanted to do in terms of talking about this, I thought I'd talk a little bit about a class that I've been teaching in terms of preparing pre-service teachers to teach computational thinking. So I'm just going to talk about this a little bit. We've been teaching this class since 2019. And as I talk about this, I want to talk about some of the teaching as well as some of the research and the database decisions that we've made around the class and how it's evolved a little bit over time. So as I look at this is a 1-credit course. It's the second in a series of 3 1-credit educational technology courses that pre-service teachers take. Primarily, I'm working with elementary and early childhood education majors. So this isn't the course that the secondary majors take. They actually take a different version of this course. So I'm just looking at elementary education as I teach coding. The pedagogy of the course, it's a blended course. So we spend about 6 sessions online out of the 14, and the others are in person. And as I tell the students, if it's an in-person class, there's a reason for it to be in person. It's because we're going to do some hands-on type of learning. And so that's really important for them to understand. So they come to class. When we're doing the online things, they're things that work better online, and when we're doing the in-person things, are things that work better in person. I'll talk about those in a minute here. We am putting together a class and figuring out, well, what is it that we want elementary pre-service teachers to learn? I've done a lot of in-service professional development with teachers, and typically what happens when I go and I teach practicing teachers how to teach coding is day one, they're a little bit scared. We do an activity, program a person, which is, a lot of people have done that before. You program somebody to go from one part of the room to the next with only having 3 commands. And then after that, people are like, I think I can do this. And so, and then what happens is you start to teach them, right? And by the end of the first day, they've got some program in Scratch or something similar where they've got a character that can move around, they've got sprites that are making noise, and maybe doing some loops. And one of the things that I noticed was this was something, by the end of the first day, people usually were really excited. And they said, actually, this is something I can do. Coding's not as hard as I thought. And then sometimes in professional development, by the end of 2 months, they're still producing the same type of thing, right? Things that make use of sounds, make use of motion, make use of loops, but don't go much beyond that. So I really wanted some depth of knowledge in this course, and but at the same time recognizing it's a 1-credit course for something that's completely introductory. So what could we focus on? So there are 5 core coding concepts that we decided to focus on, which is you see here, sequence, iterators, conditionals, variables, and functions even, getting into that just a little bit. So those are how we've, in terms of identified, these are the things that we want people to practice. So the way that we put that together then is in the very first week, we have them do a code.org hour of code activity. I used to overdo it and jump right in and kind of push them into the deep end, had them do several activities in the first week, and that was a little too much. I found that it's not to your benefit to have people coming back hyperventilating after week one. Instead, you want them kind of saying, yeah, actually, this is easy. I can do this, right? And so we use the hour of code activity. Usually takes people about 20 to 30 minutes to finish. They come back and they say, yeah, actually, this was kind of fun, right? I didn't realize that coding could be like this. Some people said they had some trouble, but generally speaking, most students come back saying, I can do this, right? I'm more open to this now. I will say that there are a lot of hour of code activities at this point, right? Over the 10 years the hour of code has been around, a lot of people have joined in and created different hour of code activities. And so I've specifically chosen 2 for students to choose from, and they do one of the 2. And those, I specifically choose those because they get at these, they get at sequence, iterators, and conditionals. They don't get to variables and functions, but I choose hour of code activities that specifically get at those first 3 concepts so that I can tell students this is what we're going to be doing in many different ways throughout the semester. The first semester I taught it because I wanted students to go deep. I primarily focused on Scratch so that they could go deeper as they learned to code, because it would apply to all other coding platforms that they might use in elementary education. Also in elementary ed, primarily people are using block-based coding. So our focus, we decided, was just going to be on block-based coding. At the end of that first semester, students were telling us this felt like it was just a Scratch class, right? We did do a couple of weeks of microbits and Scratch Junior, but students just saw the whole class as a Scratch class, and they weren't seeing the larger picture of coding and computational thinking specifically. So we decided instead to move to what you're seeing here now, and this has evolved a little bit over the couple of years we've been doing this. But we start off that first week with a code.org, hour of code, soft introduction. People come back saying, yeah, I can do this. And then we do Scratch Junior the next week and have them create an interactive story in Scratch Junior using 4 scenes, because that's the max number of scenes you can have in Scratch Junior. And they choose a story that they like from, a kid's story, and they retell it in those 4 scenes in an interactive way. Right. And we have specific rubrics that they can get more points if they use some more complex coding, making sure they're using broadcasting. We find that Scratch Junior is actually a really good way of introducing this idea of broadcasting using the envelopes. It actually, we find introducing that in Scratch Junior first helps people with Scratch, understanding event-based coding. So then we spend the next several weeks online learning Scratch. This is something that works great online. I don't need to be in person to do that with my students. I can see their screen, they can see my screen. So that's a good part of this, the blended part of this course. And we take them from a teacher introduction where they create Here I Am, something that they can use regardless of which grade they might be teaching, to share with their students to introduce themselves. And they also then do an activity where they create some sort of classroom coding. And this is where I saw a lot of growth in my students, was when they decided, when they learned in looking at other teachers' projects, that coding, how other teachers use coding. And they come to a realization that there's 2 key ways that teachers use coding. First is as an activity for students to be able to do things. So for example, during the pandemic, prior to the pandemic, my children at their elementary school always did a living wax museum, and they dressed up as a character. They all did a biography of a specific person, and the gym would be full the night that they would present, and they had a little poster. They'd stand by their poster and people would go around and talk to them. That became something they couldn't do during the pandemic, right? So some teachers turned to having kids create an interactive biography, acting as the person instead of doing it live. And so that's one type of activity, is where kids can use it in the classroom. But a lot of growth I saw in my teachers is once they realized that they could use Scratch and other programming tools to their own benefit, to create something for their kids. So they could spend 2 hours looking for something on the internet, or they could spend 2 hours making it themselves, right? And that's where a lot of the growth starts to happen, is when they start to realize, hey, this is a tool for me as a teacher. So I start off in the first day teaching them and convincing them that coding is for kids. But by week 7, I am telling them coding, it's not just for kids anymore. And so when they realize that, they start to open up to the possibilities of what they might be able to do. So then we go into robotics. I just have a couple of weeks of robotics while they're doing their other projects. So there's no assignments associated with those. It's just come to class. I'm going to borrow the robots from our lab preschool that we have. We've got a lab school that has preschool and kindergarten here on campus, and they use a bunch of robotics. And so I go over, I borrow their robots. It actually lends a lot of credibility to my students to tell them that I borrowed these from the preschool. So this isn't just something that Dr. Rich has come up with. And they get their hands on a lot of the different robots that our preschool has and uses. And then we do several weeks of hands-on coding with microbits. And this is also in person, so they can help them. We have several different projects. They do a science project, they choose a project. Their culminating project is an activity in any subject that they might use in the classroom. And then students asked at the end of the second or third semester, they said, I feel like I learned how to code, but I didn't learn how to teach coding. And so we decided to have a couple of weeks where they could learn about pedagogies for teaching computer science in the classroom, and how other teachers might do this, as well as we spend some time doing some unplugged coding activities to practice computational thinking. And those unplugged activities are also spread throughout the semester as we engage in different activities. So that's an overview of the class, kind of digging into it. In terms of how do I gather data from this class to make decisions on it, it is a 1-credit class, and so I have to watch the amount of time. Typically you look at spending 2 hours outside of class for every hour in class, according to our Carnegie system. And students always tell me they spend way too much time in this class for a 1-credit class. And so I have them every single assignment. When they turn in the assignment, they answer a Google survey that then I aggregate that data, and they tell me exactly how many hours they spend on the assignment, how much they like the assignment, how proud they are of their work, what questions they have, and what did they learn. I also have them take a pre-post using the survey we've developed, the teacher's beliefs about coding and computational thinking. And so I've got a lot of data, and I figured out over the several semesters, there's usually about 5 sections of this class, how much time it takes to do each assignment. So I have only got I think 2 minutes. So I'm just going to show you some of the data really quickly in terms of what it is that we're learning and how students start off. Also, one of the things in terms of teaching coding that we've done recently is, despite starting to believe that, this is something they could use in the classroom, a lot of the students still don't fully see how it might actually be used in the classroom. So 2 semesters ago, I had my students interview. I had 43 teachers agree to be interviewed, but I had about 90 students. So they doubled up on interviewing teachers. And this is where they really started to believe, 1, that coding was even being taught in the classroom, and 2, that they could do it. It's really, really revealing for them to be able to talk to a real teacher and see what's happening in the classroom. And so even though that took away a coding assignment, it did help them understand a bit better how they could teach coding in the classroom. So the very first day of class, then they do their syllabus quiz. We just ask this question: what are your first impressions or thoughts and feelings when you hear the phrase coding in the classroom? I didn't filter these. I just went and grabbed the first 5 from my last section, right? You can see here how students are answering. It doesn't feel like something I can practically teach. I don't think one class is going to qualify me to teach anything coding related. I definitely won't feel comfortable enough to teach it, right? I'm open to learning new things. I just don't think it's going to happen, right? And that's kind of, you see this from a lot of people. Some people, another student, I think it's kind of futuristic, progressive, classrooms with lots of money, not my classroom, right? I was super nervous. I've never done it. I see a lot of students say this. When I hear the phrase coding in the classroom, I'm excited, right? So I do have students excited. Actually, increasingly have students coming saying, oh, my little brother is doing this in 5th grade, and he's super excited that I'm learning how to do this. And so I'm increasingly seeing that every semester. A lot of nervousness. If you're wondering about the pre-post, we just ask these questions. What is their anxiety to learn? You can see from the beginning of the semester to the end how that anxiety drops and their excitement goes up. There's still a lot of room for growth. And then their confidence is basically nothing to begin with at the beginning of the semester. And they kind of get up to that 6.5 range. And this is typical most semesters. As far as the beliefs about coding go, you can see here where they, especially in their beliefs about being able to code and teach coding, they start off not thinking they can do it at all, to the point where they're like, I can sort of do this, right? So still room for growth. Last day of class, ask a single anonymous question, which is, what have you learned about yourself as a learner as you've learned to code? Because these are teachers, I think it's important for them to focus on learning and what it's like to be a learner of something new. They're generally juniors and seniors, which mean that they're in their major. And in most of their courses in their major for elementary educators, the content itself isn't new so much as the pedagogy and learning how to teach that content. This is different. Coding is new for most of my students, right? And it's important for us to understand that this is totally new for them. So this is a common response. I just went and grabbed the top 10 responses, top 10 meaning first 10, sorry, from this survey, the last time I gave the survey in spring. And you can see here, this is a common response. I can do things that push me and are out of my comfort zone. I can do hard things. I just need a lot of time to figure something out, and that's okay. I can learn new skills in a relatively short amount of time. Coding is actually fun. That patience really is a virtue, and practice makes all the difference. I learn best by sitting down and thinking about what I need to do to solve my code before coding. I really emphasize this in the classes, decomposing, thinking it through, planning it out, right? So you can kind of see here, this is the typical type of response that I'm getting from students by the end of the class. So you can see from the beginning to the end, there's a lot of nervousness. And at the end, they've learned that they can do something that they didn't think they could do. So regardless of what their coding skills are, that's a big takeaway for me in pre-service teachers learning to code and to think computationally, is that they can start to see that they can do things that they never imagined that they would be able to do. And in some cases, like this student, it also can be fun. Right? A lot of students are actually saying that by the end of the semester is like, I didn't think I would like this, and I do. So I know that was kind of drinking from a fire hose, but I want to make sure to respect Dr. Kale's time as well. So that's kind of it in terms of how I approach the teaching of computational thinking and coding to pre-service teachers.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Rich. Dr. Kale, would you like to share your screen?
Sure, yeah. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Rich, by the way. I mean, that was a great presentation. I mean, a lot of things, even though it's a 1-credit course, I mean, it looks quite packed and many experiences for the students. I don't know what they think about the workload there for themselves, but.
Oh, you know exactly what they think of the work. It's everybody talks too much, but that's match those that are expected, because I'm able to track exactly the number of hours they tell me week by week.
Okay, sounds good. Are you guys able to see my screen? Or
yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. So just making sure all audios are good here. Okay. Typical PowerPoint instead of Google presentations. All right. Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you for your time attending this talk series. I appreciate your interest in this topic. And my name is Ugur Kale. I'm a professor in the School of Education at West Virginia University. My areas is instructional design and technology. I also teach courses for teacher education. So I try to tweak the title a little bit. I know the overall topic is computational thinking for pre-service teachers, but I try to relate that to a little bit something else related to pre-service teachers. But computational thinking is another tag or another content for teacher ed. Just to give you, I think, maybe a little bit background in terms of like what we're talking about it. And maybe most of you attending this presentation have seen some definitions of what computational thinking is. There are multiple definitions, and but the one common theme that really puts everybody all this definition together is that it is a kind of approach to solve some kinds of problems. I don't think we're going to be able to solve every single problem by using computational thinking, but it's a problem. It's an approach that we can use to solve some problems, and that approach is something that we learn from computer science field. So to the degree that solving problems is important to education, and then we would be really interested in the in understand the value of computational thinking. So if you think problem solving is not important, then we don't need to worry about computational thinking. But that's not the case. We do know that problems are important, and how to solve them are kind of key to what we are doing in educators. So then, and this is one of the, I think, promising approach. And let's see and let's understand how we really make it a good job using it. So, but what is it? And again, a bunch of different ways of defining it, but it starts with the problem. When we're talking about computational thinking, then we try to break that problem into smaller components. We decompose that, and later we try to see if those components have some sort of patterns among them. We might come up with maybe some sort of a plan, an algorithm that we can use a computer to solve that problem instead of us maybe doing it. We might even come up with some sort of automations. And as we are doing and trying to solve, we will try to also troubleshoot as we try to solve this problem. And coding is a way of, maybe the most explicit way of practicing computational thinking processes. It is not the only way. I think we would be able to be engaged in these processes with unplug activities and maybe a bunch of other tools as well. But the question becomes like, these are, I mean, if there will be some differences depending on where you're reading, but if we agree that these are some at least common processes that we really want our students to be engaged in, so what can we really do? What can they really do so that they will really going through these processes? And I call that as computational thinking practices. And I believe those practices would vary depending on the content you're teaching. And what you're seeing here is based on the literature review, but kind of specific to mathematics and science. So in this case, we're talking about maybe one group here, data practices, where students actually collect data, create data, manipulate or analyze or visualize. Any kind of practices might really push students toward going through these processes in the middle. Likewise, students actually might use simulations or modeling. They might assess some existing models. They might actually create, they design, or they even construct those models or simulations. As they are doing all these things, again, they will be going through these processes. This is not to say that these are the only practices and only processes related to computational thinking, but at least some common, I think, practices and processes that we really want our students to be engaged in. So if this is really what we think what computational thinking is, then one of the main goals in teacher education related to pre-service teachers is that we really want to help them. We want to really help pre-service teachers understand and promote these practices and processes. And again, it's not just like knowing what it is. I mean, hopefully they will have a good understanding what each process is here, each practice is here. But can they really take this into their teaching efforts? Can they really take it into their placement classrooms? And hopefully after they graduate, can they really implement this in their school setting? So that is, I think, one of the major goals in specific to computational thinking for pre-service teachers. So luckily, I'm happy. That's why I instead of putting my own smile face, I just put this one. I'm happy to say that there are initiatives. There are things happening in pre-service teacher education, and Dr. Rich provided a very good example there. So this is not just only for in-service teachers only. I mean, we've seen in the past most of the initiatives, and tend to be for teachers who are already in the schools. But why do we need to wait until they graduate and become teachers to do that? Why can't we actually prepare them while they are pre-service teachers? So we see new programs, new initiatives, whether it's funded or not. So these are very promising. But what does that really mean? Like, I mean, these are good, but are they really good enough? I mean, do we need definitely some rooms for improvements? We do. And before I talk about some of the issues, I just wanted you to pretend, just for a while, thinking about computational thinking as a technology. And I don't mean that computational thinking is technology. but it involves use of technologies. In the example that Dr. Rich gave was coding. There is Scratch, there's Scratch Junior, there are robots, there are a bunch of things. But just for a while, forget about the CT, computational thinking, but think about the technology. Like instead of saying CT in teacher education, which is the title of today's topic, how about I put technology instead and say technology in teacher education? Oh, we've done a lot of things. We've seen a lot of things. We've seen some issues. So that might be something that applicable to CT education as well. The one thing that CT integration may be another word to think about it, because we do have a lot of phrases, technology integration. Is technology really integrated, or is it a standalone subject? We kind of know and read and do a lot of studies about barriers to technology integration. So maybe we're going to start thinking about what are the barriers to computational thinking. And the very last one, I think, which was kind of like funny to say, like when you are a person from a technology, education related or instructional design related field, your colleagues might be calling you, hey, here's a technology person. Or if your student is now working at a public school as a technology integration specialist, he or she will be called a technology person too. So are we going to really see people are going to be called computational thinking person? I don't know. It will be funny, but if it is, that might be a way for them to call it. But one thing, when we try to pretend this game, just putting technology instead of computational thinking, I think raises the issue of the computational thinking integrated into other content areas. Now, when you look at the research, we see that computational thinking is used more like a standalone subject, like teaching computer science concepts, as opposed to an approach that is used in different content areas, like science education, like math education, and so forth. There are examples, but very minimal. To me, looking at all the studies, and that speaks to me, is that there are difficulties in applying computational thinking practices and processes in disciplinary classroom context. And that is a big problem, and a problem of integrating CT in teacher education. And one part of that big puzzle, to me, is the teacher education faculty. How to engage teacher education faculty in promoting computational thinking, whether they are math educators, whether they are science educators, whether they're teaching literacy or social studies. Are they ready? Can we engage them in promoting computational thinking? Well, the consequences of not engaging them or not trying to understand, how these people can play a role in these initiatives would be that computational thinking will be just like a technology standalone subject in teacher education. We're going to see it as part of, let's say, a technology integration course, and maybe not necessarily connected to science, not connected to math, not connected to social studies. And as a person who I feel maybe more comfortable with the technologies, or as a background teaching instructional design, I might have a technology integration course that really specifically focuses on computational thinking. And I might try to relate to other content areas and ask students to make those connections. But in their method courses or in other content courses they're taking in the teacher education, they're not going to be prompted by their teacher education faculty, their instructors, to make those connections as well. So it will be like just my efforts, because I'm a technology person, to really push this idea in my class. And that will really look more like a standalone subject. And I think to certain degrees that may be okay, simply because those kind of, I think, standalone subjects will give pre-service teachers the opportunity to really spend a good amount of time in understanding the basics. Like Dr. Rich's class, I mean, in that, it's a packed course, a lot of coding activities. I mean, maybe we need something like that before they get into, using this to connect into those different content areas. So I'm not saying standalone subject is necessarily bad, but if the main goal is to really integrate this in the teacher education, we really need the teacher education faculty game. They need to be game in this process. I also feel that another part of this puzzle is the placement schools. We've trying to integrate computational thinking in mainly science education courses at WVA here, part of a grant, which I'm going to talk about that later. But we realizing more and more the placement schools actually play a much bigger role than the kind of things that I'm trying to teach or show in my classes. One quote here from one of the students after a semester long of computational thinking activities in the class, and they're supposed to be really doing lessons and implementing in their placement schools. But one thing really got my attention is that he says, I don't understand why we have a whole class about computational thinking when it's not used in our placement classrooms. And the examples that Dr. Rich also provided, that if there are teachers out there that they're already using it, it's one of the big gateways. Like the question is, how do we engage those mentor teachers, the teachers from the placement schools, in supporting our pre-service teachers? If you're lucky, we're going to have hopefully some teachers who know or who are interested in doing it. But the reality is that there will be the majority of the teachers may not be necessarily doing anything about computational thinking in their classes. And if our placement school, if our pre-service teachers are placed in their classrooms, they're going to see a total different practice than what we are trying to promote in their teacher education courses. So really, I think the engaging mentor teachers in the process is important. Unfortunately, the reality is that it's not going to work each time. We're going to have teachers, we're going to have schools where what we're really trying to teach may not be part of their focus. But maybe what our focus can be is that, it's okay. In reality, there will be some cases like this, but can we really help pre-service teachers to question as opposed to accept or, perpetuate that status quo? Just because it's not used in your placement school, doesn't mean what we're trying to teach here is not relevant. It is still important. It's relevant, but can we really get our pre-service teachers to a point where they can really question if this is something that's really not be present in their classrooms? So to me, this is the second puzzle of the big questions. If we are trying to integrate this in pre-service teacher education, we got to be ready where we have to work with mentor teachers and make sure that they are also game. But even if they are not, can we push our students to a level where they can actually question as opposed to really accept what is being implemented there? And in an ideal world, we might have the entire teacher education faculty game and ready. We might have the placement schools, they're all ready, or we might hopefully have good connections with those mentor teachers. So everybody can be game here. But is that all? And obviously not. There are a bunch of other factors to really think about it. But one of the most important one is definitely what exactly we do in our classrooms when we work with pre-service teachers. In other words, what do we do in our instructions? What are our instructional interventions that need to really help students moving from point A to point B? And what are those points in any way? When we're talking about instructional interventions, of course, we are trying to provide these coding experiences. We're trying to make connections to maybe content or content stands and so forth. But what is the big overarching things that we really should see at the end? And I'm just listing some of them here. For instance, interest. Would my pre-service teachers be still interested at the end of the day incorporating computational thinking in their teaching practices? I mean, I do something, maybe they were interested, maybe they're not, but this is maybe one of the most important things. If they have an interest, hopefully they will take it to the next level when it comes to really teaching them after graduation. Same thing with the value. Do they see the value of it? Do they see it's relevant to what they do? And I just talk about the fact that, they might not see the relevance if they feel their host teachers, mentor teachers are not doing it. Or if they don't think that this is really related to the content they're trying to teach. Do they feel competent? I mean, that's definitely, it's very obvious. That's why we're providing all these workshops, all these experiences for coding and maybe a bunch of other things. If they're not going to feel competent, they're not going to be able to do it. And the biggest question is, are they really using it? Are they really going to use it? So you might say that, hey, might be genius to come up with all these things. How did you come up with? I'm not genius. I'm sorry for breaking the news. I actually look at the literature review to see, what are the things that might be really important. And I'm just going to summarize those literature review with a sentence here for you, is that our willingness or interest to start or an effort that we put in an activity really depends on how much we value it, how much we see it relevant, and how much we really expect ourselves to really be able to complete it successfully. So that's really like a very succinct, I think, sentence here that puts all these different kinds of theories, and really highlighting the fact that, yes, it's not just about competence. It's not just about the value. It might be just about maybe the interest as well, but how much they really use it. So as part of an NSF-funded research, we've been testing these ideas. We've been really trying to integrate computational thinking in a content area, and in this case, specifically a science content. But we really try to target these bigger goals. Like, do we make them be more interested in those? Do they really see the value of it? Do they feel more competent? Are they using it to a greater degree? And I'm not giving so much background here, but this project, just the first semester is over, just the beginning part of it, is really trying to integrate the computational thinking in the science method course. Similar to Dr. Rich's example, we have some coding activities, we have some unplug activities, but in terms of coding, we use Scratch. We actually use Minecraft education. You can do a lot of coding with Minecraft education as well. And then we provide those activities. They have flashcards to follow. They have practice opportunities in class. And they're also given tasks to really do something after what they've seen in these classes, or if they practice with these flashcards. We also try to relate that to content, which is science, but maybe an issue that matters to the context here. And we're talking about the West Virginia context. And one big issue in this area is actually food access. We are talking about, places, like we call them food deserts, for somebody to get a very nutritious food. I'm not talking about the food that you can find in a gas station. I'm not talking about the food that you can find in, let's say, a Dollar Tree. I'm talking about maybe a fresh food, fresh meat, or fresh, vegetables. So we do have some issues in the context of West Virginia. We try to put this around, like in terms of garden-based learning, and how we can actually use computational thinking to understand that problem, and maybe try to grow food or maintain food by using this methodology, because that is a problem, right? When we talk about computational thinking, there got to be a problem. So that is a problem, but can we really solve it? Can we really use computational thinking to understand that problem? That was the main purpose and the focus of this research project. But I'll just show you what I think what happened in the outcome, whether I really increase their interest, I make them feel more competent or not. Just showing you what happened from beginning to end of the semester. On average, our students going through everything increase their competence. They feel more competent about using these technologies, using coding, and so forth. But when I ask about their interest level, are you still interested in this topic? We see a decrease there. As a matter of fact, they even like some decrease in terms of the value they place on computational thinking. In terms of usage, it's the same. I'm like, after all this, looking at these findings, and by the way, we have like around 75 pre-service teachers. I'm like, holy moly, we get all this grade, and now things are not working, other than the fact that they are maybe more competent, which is great. But really, the whole purpose was to help them increase their interest, their user value, and so on. It was like very depressing. And we're trying to understand that by looking at the survey data, by looking at interviews, and one thing that shows up, which makes me feel better, and I'm going to talk about that, is the competence. Competence actually play a role in terms of their interest, in terms of their perception of value of computational thinking, or even usage. And what we did actually, we tried to identify students who feel more competent, and we call them very high competent. We also look at students who are still not competent enough. We put them in a low competent group. So as a matter of fact, students who are at the low competence really lost their interest. They really don't see the value of it, and they don't necessarily use it. But those who really felt competent toward the end have a little bit different perspective. What I'm presenting here is just a couple of findings here, but you see 3 graphs with 2 colors, red and blue. Red are indicating students who are feeling highly competent at the end of the semester. The blue are the ones are basically low competent groups. We see that from beginning to end, which is measured by pre and post stats, a lot of changes. For instance, look at the situation. We have different kinds of situation in interest that we measure, but one of them is this maintained interest. We realize that actually students who are really competent at the end of the day are able to maintain their interest in computational thinking. When they see it the very first time at the beginning of the semester, hey, it sounds interesting. There's interest being sparked by these new terminologies and new ideas. But the more time they spend with the coding, the more time they really spend and realize that it takes a lot of effort to turn this idea into a teaching, they realize difficulties. And at the end, even though it's something like so interesting to me, after all these experiences, which might be challenging for me, I'm like, no, I don't want this anymore. I'm not interested in anymore. I might be in that mode. So really, if I'm not able to increase my competence, I'm going to think like that because it's challenging for me. I will probably be losing my interest, which happens for the students who lost or who are still not able to feel competent enough about this. The same thing we can say that about the usage. This graph you look at the bottom. So of course, the more competent you are, the more frequently you're going to really integrate computational thinking in your teaching practices. So the pattern here is that the competence is a key. Even though we are saying that we're going to try to make this thing more interesting, they're going to really find it more interesting. They're going to really see the connections to maybe their subject matter experts if they are giving more opportunities to practice this thing. So Dr. Rich, when you presented that, when I told you that this is a quite packed curriculum, I think it is good. We need to really make it even more packed. The question, and unfortunately in my case, if I try to introduce more coding activities and more, it's going to take away from the time from the other areas, which is the subject itself. So that is a challenge for me to think about it, but that's a reality that I'm facing it. So bring it back to that questions. Is that really all? I mean, yeah, we want to make sure that, yes, the teacher and faculty are game. They are part of this initiatives. Without them, like I said, it's going to be still a standalone subject. We want to make sure, our placement school mentor teachers are interested in that, and hopefully they are doing something with it. But if they're not, then we need to make sure our students are able to question what they see there, and instead of really accepting what they've seen in those practices. And very lastly, I think is that, yes, we want to have some sort of instruction interventions, but what are the bigger goals? I think the bigger goal is not just the competency, but also making the pre-service teachers still maintain their interest at the end of the day, because they might feel competent, but if they're not interested in that, they're not going to be thinking about considering using this when the time comes for them to start teaching it. So of course, there are a bunch of other things to maybe to display in this equation, but at least these are the 3 kind of pillars that I feel challenging, and it will continue to be challenging for students when it comes to computational thinking. But we know that these are pretty much the similar, I think, pillars when it comes to any kind of technology innovation integration. So I'm just going to stop at this point. I'll later share my slides, and for those interested in that, they will be able to access to those references that I made here. So, Lucas.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kale and Dr. Rich. These were wonderful presentations, very insightful. I'd like to open the floor for questions. If our attendees have any questions, they can unmute their microphone or type them in the chat, and we will get to them. So I have one for Dr. Rich from John May 1. How long did it take in-service teachers to become somewhat comfortable with teaching computational thinking by using Scratch, since it has more of a learning curve? And after in-service teachers learned about Scratch and computational thinking for half a semester, for a semester, were they able to teach coding lessons? And did they teach standalone computational thinking lessons or lessons that are cross-curricular?
Great questions. So let me see if I can, I'll try to answer these one at a time, and then I'll just answer whatever question I want to make up, right? So how do, I actually use some of the same scales to look at the training that goes on with Boot Up. So with Boot Up, I am not one of the professional development facilitators. I work with them as an external evaluator. To answer her question here, they are a nonprofit organization that offers training for in-service teachers in elementary education to teach coding. Their curriculum has changed over the years as they've done things. Primarily they focus on Scratch Junior and BBOTs for pre-K through 2. And for 3rd through 6th grade, they'll focus on Scratch, teaching those things. When I look at the same metrics as I showed you with my students in terms of some of these things that Dr. Kale was talking about that are based on the expectancy value scales, right? So what is their value for teaching? I find that a lot of teachers at this point, when they start off, are starting off with high valuation of teaching coding in elementary school. Even the teachers that are completely afraid, have no confidence in themselves. And I'm seeing this in every state, right? Right now, I think we're probably working with 50 different school districts across the country. So I get to see it all over, and it's fun to see. They do 6 trainings across the year. So typically there's like a summer training and then 5 that are spread, usually by about a month apart throughout the school year as they do things. By the end of the school year, typically teachers at the end of their first year, in terms of their confidence, are about the same level that you saw my students at the end of a semester. I will say that teaching in-service teachers and teaching pre-service teachers is totally different. Because as a professor over pre-service teachers, I have authority over them that you don't have as a professional development coordinator, right? They want the grade. And the average incoming grade of students at my university is incoming GPAs are above a 3.8. So I have a high achieving group of students who are typically used to getting very good grades. And so when they struggle with something, like a lot of them do with coding, it's new to them. But they are really good students and they want to put in the efforts to learn it, right? And so they have that motivation. The teachers in the classroom, it's going to be completely different, right? They have different mechanisms in place that are motivating them, and it's not grades, it's the value of coding just to begin with. I will say by the end of the first year, though, teachers that even start with a high value end with a higher value, and start with low confidence, they're typically on that 6-point Likert type scale. Typically at the end of their first year, they're between the 4 and the 5 on that Likert type scale, which is somewhat agree to comments about coding. And they're typically about at a 5, which is their confidence to teach coding at the end of the first year. They typically start kind of at a 4.5 on their computational thinking confidence, and that's confidence without, that's CT without coding type of stuff. And they'll usually grow on that one a little bit towards the 5. So by the end of the first year, I do see teachers who have taught it and who have participated in those 6 trainings showing confidence. There's still room for growth in their ability to teach coding. I will say that the biggest difference that I see with in-service teachers is how often they teach coding. There tends to be 2 groups. There's the groups that teach weekly and the groups that teach monthly. And it's those groups that are teaching it weekly that see it more. If they integrate, that's typically because they're generalists, which means they're not the computer teacher, they're the classroom teachers. So I see the classroom teachers talking about integrating coding more than I see the coding specialists in the school, right? The computer teachers, the library media specialists, the STEM teachers. So it's kind of split in terms of how much they're integrating. So lots of questions. I hope I answered those, but yeah, I'm open to any follow-ups on those.
Thank you. I have a question, Dr. Kale. You talked about working with teacher educators, like you both did, and one of the challenges for doing computational thinking and teacher education is actually getting buy-in. People tend to be very insular and they will teach their disciplines on their own and their schedules are already packed. Um, can you tell me about your process of getting buy-in from teacher educators to actually do computational research and work in the classroom?
Very good question. I think I was lucky in certain ways. I'm not sure if everybody's in that position, but almost 5 years ago, I was asked to teach a science method course. And I mean, I had a math background. I've taken some classes in the college, of course, physics and biology. But it will be like my first time to do it. I'm like, I don't think I'm a science educator. You know, I'm an instructional designer. So I'm like, I changed that perspective a little bit because there was a request and there was a need. I took that challenge. And that challenge actually opened me to meet with science educators, first of all, in the college. And one of the instructors, I mean, at that point was just guiding us, you know, through all this content. So I tried to gain that, but as I was doing it, I started to like introduce these ideas, and I'm like, hey, her name was Ashley. Ashley, can we actually write something about this related to computational thinking? So we started writing and collecting some data and related to computational thinking, even though she was not necessarily interested in science ed, but I really engaged her in the writing process, which she ended up being interested in and ended up using in her teaching. But because I was like, I was doing the science part, I wanted to reach out to even math educators. And then I have very great colleagues here. You're like, you know, my approach is like, hey, writing something. I think at that point, my approach was, let's write a grant. You know, here is something, and I feel that it's very relevant to math education, and they're like still not sure about it, but I talk about it a little bit. But would you be interested in serving as a co-PI if I write this? So I got their attention in that sense, and I don't know if I was able to pursue it. That writing wasn't successful, but later I got the grant, but then they were not on the grant. So I think they have still similar reactions like, hey, this is a cool idea, but really we don't know so much about the zoo. If you're doing it, you need to really teach us how to, that is the approach. But really, I think my main approach is, can I really engage you in something, writing it? I think the more they are engaged in those things, that they learn about it, and like, let's try it. And instead of doing something crazy, let's just do a very small something, some activity. Can we do that? To me, those are more important gate openers than just coming out with a full-scale plan and let's go and implement it, because that's not going to work. They're not going to have the time in their classes to do it anyway. I do know that some faculty here, I mean, we are so comfortable asking us, hey, I do provide this. Can I just come in one of those days to do it? I have a faculty who present a couple of workshops towards the end of it, so I let him do it. So we have those kind of like introductions about some topic, and if it's realized that there's a need, that I feel it, then I will make it part of it. I don't think there's a single answer to that, but maybe my answer is just to really introduce by small pieces, whether it's a little presentation in their classes or a kind of writing activity that it's something that they can turn into a presentation or even a publication later, and that will introduce them the knowledge, and hopefully it will take from there.
Awesome, thanks. Dr. Rich, do you have any different perspective on that?
I don't know if it's different. It does sound, Ugur, what a great opportunity you've got there. That's awesome. I do have an article with a student of mine who looked at this topic for her master's thesis. It's under review right now, so I can't say where it's going to end up. You know, it's been several months. We've kind of pinged the editors a couple of times. But we looked at attitudes across the state. We actually surveyed the teacher ed faculty specific to elementary education across the state in teacher education to see what their attitudes were towards computational thinking, what their knowledge was. There's some interesting findings there, so I'll be excited to share that with everybody once that comes out. But yeah, Meg Swanson is the name of my student whose thesis work that was. So when you see something come out with Swanson there, she's got some interesting insights into kind of this question of what do teacher educators really think, and what does the support look like at their institutions?
And to follow up on that, I do we have something. It's still in the proof, but I don't think it's going to be a problem here. Just sharing the link. But this is the very same publication that we had, and that talks about some of the activities that we used, including links to like Scratch animations and so forth, if anybody is interested in that. But the same person that I published it, the second author, is now in a different institution, actually. But yeah, we started writing this together. So I think, and after we have also Dr. Yuan part of this publication as well. So if anybody's interested in that, it's here. It's still proofing, but I don't think there will be major changes into that. It's not fully published, but everybody should be able to access it if they want to. I just put it on the chat.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. I am afraid we're out of time. Thank you so much for these great presentations, the insights about computational thinking and pre-service teacher education. I appreciate your contributions and your thoughts, and we will be making this recorded webinar available on the RTD YouTube channel and on our website in the AECT platform. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. Good to see you, Dr. Rich, and thank you again, Lucas, and